Walter Briggs once had his name etched in brass, honored for bravery, respected by armed men and wide-eyed school children alike. Now, he pushes a rusted shopping cart down cracked sidewalks, invisible to almost everyone. But on the morning he was handcuffed outside a corner store, something shifted. A name buried in a file, a memory that never should have been forgotten, and a courtroom that, for the first time in years, fell silent to listen. This isn't a story about charity. It's about dignity, and what happens when it's finally seen again. Walter Briggs started each morning with a routine no one asked for and no one noticed. Just past sunrise, when the mist still hugged the low rooftops of Edgewater's industrial district, he pushed his battered shopping cart slowly along the sidewalk beside the old railway line. The wheels wobbled, one of them screeching faintly with each rotation, a sound he no longer heard. Inside the cart, 2 folded blankets, a tin coffee cup, a book missing its cover, and a rain-stained photo in a cracked plastic frame. Walter wore the same brown field jacket every day, the one with the U.S. Army patch barely hanging from the shoulder seam. His boots were scuffed, the laces mismatched. He moved without urgency, like a man who understood that the world had already chosen to move past him. On most days, he stopped at the back steps of the old public library. The building was modest, red brick, fading green trim, a ramp that groaned under the weight of time. He always arrived before it opened, not to enter, but to sweep the walkway with an old broom he kept hidden behind the hedges. No one paid him for it. He just did it, quietly, always. Some mornings, a librarian named Joy would nod to him from the staff door, coffee in hand. She never asked questions, and he never offered answers. Their silent exchange had become a kind of unspoken ritual. He would tip his head slightly. She would half smile. Then they'd both continue with their day. This morning, Walter found something beside the trash bins, a children's book with crayon marks and a torn spine, half covered in mud. He wiped it clean on his jacket sleeve. The tiny fire truck. He remembered reading that one to someone, years ago. The memory was blurred, but it made his hand pause before he placed it into the little wooden box labeled, "Take one, leave one," near the entrance. Across the street, a man in a suit glanced at Walter, then quickly looked away. A jogger changed direction to avoid crossing near him. Walter didn't react. He just adjusted the straps on his cart and began walking again. Past the broken sidewalk, past the tired telephone poles leaning like old soldiers. As he turned the corner toward the small grocery store at the end of the block, the morning sun finally broke through the haze. It cast long, golden lines across the cracked pavement. Walter blinked at the light. His breath showed faintly in the air. He pressed a hand to the pocket where the photo always stayed. Then he kept walking, unnoticed and unthanked, but never less than upright. The inside of Grady's Market smelled of ammonia and overripe bananas. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a dull glare across scuffed linoleum floors. Walter entered through the side door, pulling his jacket tight around him as a gust of warm air hit his face. He didn't come in to shop. He never did. On colder mornings, he sometimes walked a quiet lap through the aisles just to feel his hands again. No one greeted him. No one ever did. He nodded to the old security guard slouched behind the windowed booth near the front. The man didn't look up. Walter moved slowly past the produce section. Bruised apples, discount bananas. He paused near the bread rack, not to steal, never to steal, but to remember. The smell of fresh rolls used to wake up his wife when he brought them home on Sundays. That was before the letters stopped arriving from the VA, before the world got so quiet. Down aisle 4, a teenager in a hooded sweatshirt kept glancing over his shoulder. He had a can of soda tucked under his arm and one hand inside his backpack. Walter noticed him immediately. The boy's eyes darted, nervous and fast. Then, commotion. A clerk shouted from the back. The teen turned fast, bumped into Walter hard enough to send him stumbling into a display of paper towels. The boy vanished in a flash of movement, sprinting past the checkout lanes and out the front door, setting off the automatic alarm. The crash drew attention. Products scattered across the floor. Walter, now on one knee, tried to steady himself. but the store manager had already emerged from behind the counter, face red and breathing heavy. "You!" he shouted. "I saw you!" Walter raised his hands slightly confused. "I didn't. Don't give me that," the man barked. "We got it on camera. You were with him," two customers whispered. A mother pulled her child closer. The security guard, now awake, approached quickly and grabbed Walter's arm with more force than necessary. "I'm just walking," Walter said, soft but steady. "You're stealing," the guard snapped, already reaching for his radio. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up outside. The lights painted the storefront in sickly reds and blues. Walter didn't run. He stood quietly, shoulders relaxed, as the two officers entered. One of them, a young man with a trimmed beard and crisp uniform, stepped forward. "Name?" he asked. "Briggs," Walter replied. "Walter D." The other officer, taller, already had the cuffs out. "Turn around, sir." As cold metal touched his wrists, Walter didn't speak. He only looked once more toward the bread rack, then down at his hands, now bound. No one stopped them as they walked him past the cashiers. No one asked what had really happened, and no one saw the way he held his head just high enough to not let it hang. The holding cell was lit by a single buzzing fixture that cast hard shadows against the gray concrete walls. Walter sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on his knees, fingers interlocked. The steel of the handcuffs had been replaced by silence, a silence he wore more heavily than chains. Outside the cell, Officer Ramirez finished typing up the incident report. He was new to the force, still wrote his notes in perfect block letters. As he filed the arrest sheet, he paused at the name, Walter D. Briggs. Something about it tugged at him. He couldn't place it, not yet. He opened the intake drawer to finish processing, but kept glancing at the form. In the corner of the room, Briggs's old dog tags, placed with his belongings, caught the edge of a desk lamp and reflected a sharp glint. Ramirez leaned closer. "Briggs, Walter D., Sergeant First Class, 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry. Blood type, O positive." His eyes widened. Ramirez pulled out his phone and stepped outside, pacing toward the stairwell. He tapped a number he hadn't dialed in a long time. "Uncle Vic?" he asked when the line picked up. "You ever hear of a guy named Walter Briggs?" There was silence on the other end. Then a slow exhale. "You found him?" the older man asked. Ramirez froze. "You know him?" "Know him?" Vic said. "That man carried me out of a burning truck in Nasiriyah, 3rd tour. I was bleeding out, and he came back under fire. Twice. I never saw him again." Ramirez looked back through the window at the man in the cell. Walter sat still, unmoving. "Why didn't you ever tell me that story?" Ramirez asked. "Because nobody wanted to hear it," Vic said. "And he didn't want a damn parade. Just wanted to disappear, I think." Ramirez hung up slowly, the weight of the call pressing on his chest. He walked back inside, this time looking at Walter. Really looking. The lined face, the squared shoulders, even seated. The way he sat with his back straight, like someone still standing at attention inside. Ramirez hesitated, then entered the cell area. "Mr. Briggs," he said. Walter lifted his eyes. Calm, alert, ready for whatever came next. "I spoke to someone," Ramirez said carefully. "He says you saved his life." Walter didn't blink. "Lot of people say things," he murmured. Ramirez nodded, unsure what else to say. He placed the dog tags gently on the bench beside him. "You'll be transported to municipal court in the morning," he added. "Just wanted you to know. Someone remembers." Walter looked down at the tags, then at his hands. "Someone always does," he said quietly. Then he leaned back against the cold wall, closed his eyes, and let the memory of gunfire and burning metal roll over him like smoke from an old war. Courtroom 3B smelled faintly of coffee and old varnish. The benches creaked under the weight of winter coats and tired bodies. The morning docket was moving like clockwork. Traffic violations, petty thefts, a dispute over a fence line. No one looked up. No one ever did. Then Walter Briggs was called. He stood slowly, guided by an officer toward the defendant's table. His steps were steady, boots worn thin, the cuffs removed but not forgotten. He didn't speak. didn't scan the room. Just sat with his shoulders square and hands folded, as if still waiting for orders. The prosecutor, a young man with polished shoes and no trace of hesitation, stood briskly. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended inside Grady's Market. Security footage confirms his presence at the scene. He is a known vagrant with no fixed address or income. The state recommends supervised probation at minimum." Judge Halverson didn't look up immediately. He flipped through the report, fingers tapping the file, a rhythm born of repetition. Then something fell loose from the papers. A thin chain, dog tags. The sound of metal against wood echoed like a crack in the room. The judge paused. His eyes landed on the tags. Walter D. Briggs. His breath caught. He stared. Slowly, as if against instinct, he looked up, really looked, and saw him. Not the man in a borrowed coat. Not the man in yesterday's socks and court-issued comb. He saw the face under soot and sand. The man from the photo in a war memorial he'd passed 100 times without reading the name. The room shifted. Halverson cleared his throat. "Recess," he said abruptly. 10 minutes. The clerk looked startled. "Sir?" "Now." He stood and disappeared into chambers. Whispers started. One of the officers leaned into the prosecutor with a look of concern. At the back of the room, a door opened. 2 veterans walked in, slowly, one with a limp, the other with a cane and a jacket lined with old patches. They took their seats without a word. Walter didn't turn to see them, but he knew. Back in chambers, Judge Halverson had the clerk pull a file, one older than most in the building. It was thin, typed on yellowing paper. Bronze star, Purple Heart, letters of commendation from commanding officers. A signed statement from a Marine captain who owed his life to one man. He closed the folder. Back in the courtroom, the judge returned, slower this time. He sat with his hands folded before him and looked directly at Walter. "Mr. Briggs," he said. Walter looked up. "This court is placing your case under immediate review," Halverson said. "All proceedings are paused. Effective now." Gasps fluttered across the gallery. Walter didn't react. But across the aisle, the older veteran with the cane slowly stood, raised his hand in salute, and held it there. The room stood still. The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked down at his notes as if they'd betrayed him. For once, there was nothing useful in the pages. Judge Halverson adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Briggs," he said, voice low and unwavering. "This court has received testimony and documentation that demand attention, not for your sake alone, but for ours." The silence was thick now. Even the HVAC system seemed to hush. "The court acknowledges that what occurred at Grady's Market was not a crime," the judge continued. "What happened afterward was a consequence of a city forgetting a man it should have remembered." He turned to the young officer beside him. "I've spoken with Officer Ramirez. His investigation produced military documentation and witness statements that speak of exceptional service, sacrifice, and integrity." He paused. Qualities this courtroom sees far too little of. The prosecutor, now pale, stood briefly. "Your Honor, the state has no objection. We request dismissal of all charges, with prejudice." The gavel struck once, firm, final. "Dismissed," Halverson said. Walter sat still. It wasn't that he didn't understand. It was that for a moment the weight had no place to go. He didn't know how to move without it. At the back of the room, the veteran with the cane lowered his salute and walked toward him. He paused just before the defense table, extended a trembling hand, and said only, "Welcome back, Sergeant." Walter took it slowly, not with pride, not with disbelief, just with quiet acknowledgement, as if shaking the past by the hand one last time. Behind them, someone entered the courtroom late. A woman, hair pulled back, carrying something small in her hands. It was Joy, the librarian. She walked with purpose, her face unreadable, and stopped in front of Walter. She said nothing, just placed a children's book on the table. The tiny fire truck, the same book he had pulled from the trash and left in the box. The same one a little boy had smiled over just days before. It was clean now. Rebound, a ribbon bookmark tucked inside. She gave him a small nod, then turned and left. Walter stared at the book for a long time. Then, for the first time that morning, he smiled. Not wide, not for the cameras. Just enough to reach the corners of his eyes. In the hallway outside, reporters waited, murmuring about the homeless veteran and the courtroom moment. But inside, there were no speeches, no applause. Only people standing quietly, some with hands over their hearts. Others with nothing more than the knowledge that they had seen something true. Walter rose slowly. He tucked the book under his arm. And as he walked toward the doors, the crowd parted. Not like a hero's parade, but like a path finally opening. 1 month later, the frost had started to lift. Edgewater's sidewalks were no cleaner, and its buildings no less tired. But something had changed. Not in the city, not quite, but in one narrow patch of soil behind the public library. Walter knelt there in a flannel shirt and work gloves, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The ground was still firm with the last of winter's breath, but he dug gently, careful not to tear the roots of the daffodils already beginning to push through. He didn't speak. He rarely did. He had moved into a small room above the VFW hall, courtesy of the local Veterans Reintegration Fund. The room had a cot, a kettle, and a single window that faced the street. He spent most of his days at the library, not inside still, but outside, tending the garden bed Joy had unofficially allowed him to claim. That morning, he had brought a box. It held a few items: a worn glove, a rusted dog tag, and a plastic bag filled with ashes. He opened the bag carefully and poured a portion into the hole he'd dug beneath the roots of a young sapling. An olive tree, not native to Ohio, but growing nonetheless. He covered it with soil, then placed a flat river stone over the top. No inscription, no plaque, just the tree and the quiet. As he sat back, wiping the earth from his hands, he heard small footsteps behind him. A boy, maybe 7, maybe 8, holding a book in both hands, the tiny fire truck. He stopped a few feet away. "Are you the man who fixed the garden?" the boy asked. Walter turned, nodding once. The boy looked at the tree. "My mom says it's called an olive tree. She said it means peace." Walter nodded again. The boy fidgeted, then offered him the book. "I really like this one. Someone fixed it. I think it was you." Walter looked at the book, then at the boy. "I just cleaned it," he said quietly. The boy smiled. "Well, thanks. It's my favorite." He walked off, humming, the book tucked under his arm. Walter sat for a while longer. The sun rose higher, and the light warmed the soil around the sapling. In the breeze, its leaves barely trembled. Behind him, the library door opened. Joy stepped out, coffee in hand, and leaned against the rail. She said nothing. He didn't turn. But they stayed like that for a while, just 2 people watching something small begin again. Near the edge of the garden bed, someone had added a small wooden sign. Weathered, handwritten, "Dignity doesn't need a name, but it leaves roots where it stands."